Such a case always leaves many troubling questions. Most potently, of course, why? Why would any human being do this? And if that is a question we may never get an answer to, there are other more immediate ones that we must try to grapple with. Chiefly, how do we build in further safeguards to the system? Anyone watching on Friday night after Lucy Letby was found guilty will not have forgotten Paul's interview with Dr. Ravi Jayaram, one of the neonatal consultants who first realised she was killing their defenceless patients. His attempts to stop her were thwarted by managers. As Dr. Jayaram points out to Paul tonight, there are disciplinary bodies for doctors and nurses, but not for senior health service managers.
Lucy Letby took 7 lives on this ward, but today's justice wasn't only for the dead, but for those left living with what they'd witnessed, like Dr. Ravi Jayaram.
It is absolutely correct that she's put in prison for life without any chance of release for the crimes that she's committed. But it doesn't change the fact that the parents of these babies and their families will never get back what's been taken away from them. And it's made me angry that she hasn't had the courage to be there to face up to them.
Neither have his former bosses at the hospital, in his opinion, whose statements since the verdict have said plenty, apart from sorry for their part.
There have been opportunities for those people who are at the top of the Countess of Chester to be able to put their hands up and admit that they got it wrong. And this is what's incensed me more than anything. They are still trying to find reasons why what they did was the right thing. You know, for example, one of them said, oh, well, we weren't loud enough in expressing our concerns. How much louder could we be? We were loud enough for you to try and vilify us and smear us and drive some of us to the point of applying for jobs in other hospitals.
When the first 3 babies died in June 2015, within a month, doctors had raised concerns and noted Lucy Letby's presence. They spent 18 months pleading with managers to investigate her, but claimed they were told to draw a line under it. And by the time police were finally called, 4 more babies had been murdered, multiple others had been attacked. Only the Director of Nursing, Alison Kelly, has faced consequences. Today she was suspended from her new job in another trust. The medical director back then, Ian Harvey, who told doctors there was no smoking gun, was able to retire to France. The head of nursing, Karen Rees, also retired. She says doctors didn't give her enough information to remove Lucy Letby from the ward. And the chief executive at the time, Tony Chambers, has since worked elsewhere in the NHS.
Well, I've got 2 pledges to make.
This was Mr. Chambers a year before Letby's murders.
I pledge to support a culture where the frontline staff are supported in raising concerns.
Dr. Jayaram wants change to hold NHS bosses to their word.
If there is a dodgy doctor or a dodgy nurse, there is a means for them to be found out and sanctioned. As far as I can tell, for people in senior NHS management positions, there is no robust system of accountability or appraisal. This is the culture in the NHS and it has to change.
The promised inquiry is supposed to help achieve that.
How do you feel about this inquiry not potentially having the ability to compel witnesses to give evidence?
There have been other inquiries into NHS scandals which have been statutory full public inquiries. Why on earth would this be announced as a non-statutory inquiry?
Well, the Prime Minister argues it'll be much quicker.
Is the priority speed? I would much rather have an inquiry that asked the right questions and took as much time as it needed to get the right answers.
The families and the police have both said to us that they consider you to be a hero. Do you think the enormity of the part you played in all of this has sunk in yet?
I'm not a hero, Paul. I was just doing my job. It's my job to look after babies and children. If any meaningful change about how the NHS reacts and responds to serious and even relatively minor patient safety concerns changes as a consequence of all of this, then I might possibly consider that I've done something heroic. Right now, I just think that I've done what I should have done.
and Paul is here to talk about this. Look, Dr. Jayaram was talking there about, disappointment that Lucy Letby, parents clearly desperately disappointed that Lucy Letby was not brought out of her cell. What can realistically be done in these situations?
What's on the principle here, of course, is that justice should be seen to be done, unless, of course, you're an offender and you sit in your cell and you don't have to listen to your own sentencing. And today the Prime Minister agreed that that was cowardly, in his words. He said he does want to change the law. They've been promising this for a while. Labour also want to change the law. Of course, there have been other high-profile cases in recent years of offenders who've done this too. But it is difficult. It's not straightforward. The way the law works at the moment is that a judge can order an offender to go to court, but he can't sort of compel them to go to court. And prison officers can use reasonable force to take an offender to court. But again, you don't necessarily want to get into a situation where you're physically dragging an offender into the courtroom, where they might be disruptive, disrespectful, even violent. Would that necessarily be a better outcome for the victims there, who are there to see the defendant delivered their justice? So all of this is complicated. One compromise that's been suggested is that maybe the sentencing could be streamed live into the police cell or the court cell of an offender, so that they have to listen to justice being delivered, but they can't respond to it.
I feel like every time something this terrible happens, and this is truly terrible, you kind of think, well, how could anyone do this? How can we stop it? What conclusions can we draw, listening to what the doctor said there about how to try and make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, a motive was never established in the case of Lucy Letby, and that's a very interesting fact in this case. And while that's important in terms of convicting a criminal quite often, it's not actually necessary in order to stop them from committing those crimes. You just have to establish a pattern and think something is going on here. And that is where the hospital and management are accused of failing here, because they were told for 2 years, we've got suspicions that something is going on. We don't know what, we don't know why, but something is going on, and yet they didn't call in the police. And what Dr. Jayaram and others want is some kind of accountability here. I mean, the executives I mentioned in my report there have disputed his claims, and they say they will cooperate fully with an inquiry. But whatever comes out of that inquiry, what's actually going to happen to the managers? Whereas doctors can be referred to the General Medical Council, they can be struck off. None of that applies to NHS managers, and that's what Dr. Jayaram wants to change, so that they have to be held accountable for past failings and potentially stopped from repeating those failings in future.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed.